Computer, turn on the painting set. That never gets old. Today is the day. I woke up wanting to paint a model in comic book style, and I think I have the perfect mini for it. And that model is Pizza Boy. Look at his little zoomer. Not only does this mini remind me of Into the Spider-Verse, which has an awesome animated style, it also just kind of drips youthful energy. You know, he's got the AirPods, he's got the pizza, he's taking a selfie. And when I think of comic books, I think of youth. I think of my life slipping away. The horror! Where did it all go wrong? All right, enough of that. Let's paint a mini in comic book style. But where do we begin? For some inspo, oh God. What if for the entire video I just used zoomer terms? Would that be cringe or based? Anyways, for some inspiration, I bust out my comic books. What does someone really mean when they say comic book style? It's a little confusing because, like with miniature painting, there are many types of comic book styles. Comic book artists know exactly how much color to use to sell an idea. If you look at any given panel, there isn't a lot going on. There isn't a ton of colors being used, there isn't a lot of blending going on, but you see exactly what is happening and you understand every shape that's being presented. It's like high efficiency art. And I'm not saying that because it lacks skill. It's actually quite the opposite. Putting in a stark shadow on a face that has no blending will look bad if you don't know what you're doing. And there is no way to hide that with like blending or futzing. You either get it or you don't. Okay, what's next? Normally cleaning and assembling the model would be next, but I'm kind of hyped to do something else first. I really want to drive home that comic book feel, and I think I'm going to do that in a big way with the plinth. Let me show you what I mean. That took longer than I care to admit, which is apparently the story of my hobby life. Sometimes when there are a lot of options available to me, I tend to overcomplicate designs. It's safe to say that when I bust out geometry, I'm probably going down the wrong path. Is this mini painting? This final design that I came up with is pretty simple. It basically gives you a flat area for you to glue against some kind of backdrop for your model. And I wanted to put like a brick wall, like he's in New York City in an alley or something like that, but I also wanted to put a black border around the outside of the wall, like it's a frame in a comic book panel. When it came to making the brick wall, I used my vinyl cutter to cut out the frame for the border. Then I used this new material that I can't remember the name of that takes impressions super well and also glues with plastic glue and sands pretty nicely as well and cuts pretty easily. It's almost like spongy on the inside, but it's not exactly that. I plotted out a brick pattern and then using a sculpting tool I carved in a lot of weathering, making sure I indented areas and also scratched areas. Heck, I even depressed the wall down on a bunch of scale model rocks to get little tiny chips and dings out there to make sure there's a lot of good texture. I know it took a while to do, but things like this bring me hobby joy. I'll leave the STL of this plinth down in the description below for you guys to download in case that you have a bust that you want to put a backdrop on. I actually think this brick wall is going to be a perfect place to start with the painting so I can kind of warm up to the idea of comic book style. Let's give it a shot. I started by holding up my model to the wall to kind of get a sense of where he would cast a shadow and where the light would be strongest on the wall. I kind of marked out some general bands of highlight with a graphite pencil. My initial idea for how to paint these bands was to do it with the AIRBRUSH. When it came time to mask out other zones, I wanted to use this special vinyl tape that I had found a long time ago that actually allows for some pretty cool bends. Remember earlier when I said I like to complicate things? While this idea totally did work, it's just way more difficult than just painting in the colors with a paintbrush. So that's what I did from there on out. I was constantly checking with the model to make sure that everything was looking okay based on where he was going to be approximately. After I painted what was effectively a very sad looking rainbow, I then started to black line in details. Any large dentation or any crease in the brick, I painted pure black. I used a glossier black here so it would stand out against the darker corners of the brick wall. With that complete, I started to do some edge highlighting. When doing this, it's important to think about the direction of the light. Because the cell phone light is coming from a lower area when compared with the moonlight, I felt that it should have been hitting the undersides of the brick. With that complete, I then did the edge highlighting that would represent the moonlight on the tops of the bricks. After all of that, it still wasn't looking right, so I bust out some references to kind of get some inspiration. The solution I came up with was to add a lot more dark texture, and I did that with black ink and a toothbrush. Bricks have all kinds of tiny little pits in them and whatnot, and I wanted to represent that with some paint. When I was done with that, I made sure to highlight some of the larger pits with some of that moonlight and also that brick highlight color as well. And that honestly kind of fixed a lot of my problems with the paint job. I don't know, I'm still not super convinced with the effect, but it is hard to know until the model is actually on there and also painted in the same style. Speaking of the model, we should get down to that now.
Before doing that, actually, a brief word from this video's sponsor. Minework Studios is a hobby company that specializes in beautiful display models, tools, and more. The model we're painting in this video, Pizza Boy, is one of their concepts from a brand new original series that covers more eclectic and less serious characters. These kinds of subjects are good for when you need a break from dour or war models and want a more fun-loving experience. Their most recent release, however, was Moonmade, a piece based on the artwork of Frank Frazetta. Cast in resin, this behemoth of a model measures 133 millimeters head to toe. It's actually limited edition, so make sure you get it before it runs out. You can also buy the model bundled with the art it's based on, as well as a suitably sized plinth. Also new to the Minework fold are a couple of models based on the art of Jody Moyer, namely the Executioner and Red. Both of these models are, well, let's just say they're a bit of me. Lastly, for their new releases, they have a new Patrick J. Jones sculpt called Hecate, which features lovely design symmetry and an angry pose. I love how a lot of Mineworks models aren't drowning in detail but are tastefully sculpted. They pick concepts and create originals that are just well-designed characters that have fun poses and are interesting to paint. They get out of the way of the paint job, which allows for maximum creativity. They could have had cast detail on the hat of the pizza boy or the pizza box, but instead they kept it blank, so you can do whatever you want with it, for example. Lastly, Minework has branched out into the world of tools as well with their very own wet palette instead of brushes. I've been using the brushes during a portion of the pizza boy paint job and have really enjoyed them. They kept a nice tip the entire time. To sweeten the deal a bit further, Minework is hooking the mini family up with a 20% off coupon code on the screen right now and also in the description below. It's valid for the next 7 days, so get it while it's good. You can find all these goodies linked in the description below. Thank you to Minework for sponsoring creators like me. Now back to painting my comic book style mini.
Because I was waiting on the plinth 3D print, I attached the model to a temporary plinth so I could still prime it and get started on the paint job. Once the model was assembled, I then primed the model black. I'm going to apply a layer of white ink like I normally do when I'm doing a zenithal undercoat on a model, but this time I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to place the lights as if the cell phone is the main light in the scene. What I'm going for is a nighttime scene. I'm hoping for a little bit of moonlight on the back and a nice strong light from the front. You can tell if I rotate the model around that there is a little bit of gray primer on the back, which will be the moonlight eventually. But the front is definitely the strongest light source, and I am going for that. The best part is because I poster tacked all of these individual elements together, I can now remove them, but I can still reference the undercoat that I did for my shading and highlighting. With the undercoat looking nice and smooth, let's obliterate it. I'm going to start the face by airbrushing it a flat brown color. This may seem counterintuitive because I applied a zenithal undercoat to the model, but I'm doing this because I see in a lot of comic books that I'm looking at that they have very nice, even flat colors. So I want to start from a nice, even flat place and then build up from there, and then add dark lining afterwards. I'm mixing my highlights with a off-white pastel green because I'm imagining the cell phone light has a green tint to it. I am still getting value out of my reference, however. I have it on the monitor right next to me, and any moment I can flip to the comic book pictures that I scanned into my computer to see what colors they use and stuff like that. While I am working from a reference, I'm not following it very religiously. If I stumble onto some kind of layer or cool thing that I painted on the model that looks cool, I'm gonna keep it there. It's difficult to mix paints while doing this because inevitably you don't mix enough paint for everything you need to do. And then you're having to like resuscitate it with water, and then it's very thin and diluted, it doesn't cover well, and the whole point of this style is very bold layers of color. So you have to mix more than you think you need, so you have enough to finish painting all the parts you need to paint. On top of that, you need to strike a balance between how much brighter and darker your adjacent layers are, and also how visible they are on the miniature. Sometimes I felt like the jumps that I was making were so scant that I couldn't really even see them at all. But other times I went too dark too quickly. There's definitely a middle ground there that requires some skill to figure out. If I had one complaint on this model, it'd be that the eyes are just unnecessarily tiny. Like the actual height of the eye, I swear, is the same height of a 28mm model. Not the width, but the height. It's like I'm painting a tiny little sliver here. My other issue is while pizza is absolutely bussin', if I opened my pizza box and saw that catastrophe, on God, I'd be the saddest little zoomer. I thought I was done with the skin, but it still wasn't looking super convincing, and so one last step that I did was I took some actual black paint and recess shaded some details that I would normally never recess shade on a face, and I think that kind of took it up just one final 5%. I moved on to the hat, and this time I decided to just work with the zenithal undercoat to see if anything was different, and if I'm being totally honest, it wasn't really. I kind of just painted over it and then it was fine. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that the character seems like they're from New York, so I kind of want to roll with that a little bit more. I got up my vinyl cutter again and cut a tiny 6mm circle. I don't know if you guys knew this, but to me it makes sheets of their masking tape, so you could print out something, stick it on here, cut it out with an X-Acto knife, and have an awesome airbrush stencil for whatever you're working on. For my circle, though, I was going for a Knicks logo, one of the NBA teams from New York. With the orange airbrushed in, I came in with a brush and a darker orange to match the shading that I had already incorporated into the hat. Then from there on out, it's all about brush skills, baby. If you need help with freehand, check out my freehand video. Lots of very helpful advice in there. But probably the biggest piece of advice is you just need stability. You might notice that I am now wearing finger cots, and that's because I am just touching this head all over the place. And I have my elbows on my armchairs, my forearms on the edge of my table. I have so many points of contact to make sure I shake as little as possible. One thing I learned while painting the brim of the hat is that when you are transitioning layers of color, especially on this like flat thing, having interesting angles is way more compelling than a perpendicular transition. For the moonlit portion, I'm basically using black and also bearing blue from scale 75. I'm kind of painting how I used to paint when I was a little kid. I would paint everything from black primer and make sure that there was always black in between each and every detail. And that's what I'm doing right now, especially on the moonlit side. It's actually quite simple. A lot of the dreads were just painted with one layer of bearing blue, and that was it. This process might seem a little bit hard to follow and also scatterbrain, and that's frankly because I have no idea what I'm doing. Does that mean I'm gonna get a bad result? Not necessarily. What it means is this process is very unsolved for me. I'm doing a little bit here, I'm doing a little bit there. I'm reacting to what's happening on the model. That seems to be kind of a theme on this model. I've never painted a model with anything other than an above light source, a zenithal one, let alone a directional and harsh light like a close cell phone. I've never done moonlight on the back of a model, and I very infrequently paint black characters. I'm really in over my head right now, and what I would do normally in this situation is just math the crap out of this. And let me show you what I mean by that. I came in with an outfit today that closely resembled what our character that we're going to be painting is wearing, with the intent to take some reference photos so it could help me with my paint job. I also downloaded headshots of black people on the internet and posterized them in Photoshop to see what a more comic book style picture would look based on a real world photo. Now, none of this is inherently bad until you consider this next thing. Some of these smell weird. These are all my unpainted display models that I bought or was sent at some point with the intent to paint. And clearly that hasn't happened. Big yikes. For me, a model of this size and detail can take a long time to paint, between 20 and 40 hours, or maybe even more if I'm going for a higher quality finish. And so in this group, there is 20 or so models, which could be between 600 and 800 hours of painting if my trend stays the same. When you think of it like that, it becomes super daunting. And then add on the extra stress of having to dress up like the character so you can take reference photos. You know, it's okay if a model doesn't look beautiful. And I'm saying this more for myself than for anyone, but if anyone needs to hear that, I think it's really important. I think a lot of hobbyists, myself included, tend to lose sight of the fact that the journey, the actual painting of the models, is supposed to be fun, and that's supposed to be where you get most of your joy from. Whereas in reality, a lot of us are very outcome focused. We care a lot about what the model looks like, to the point of being afraid to even paint it in the first place. It's like my email inbox. If I don't ever look at it, it doesn't mean that I have a bazillion unread emails, right? Unfortunately not. Every model we paint in our career is a stepping stone, so let's step. Yes, I am still working from some kind of reference, but I am trying my hardest to let go and let my intuition do the painting. All right, on to the rest of the bust. I began painting the rest of the model with the jacket. I chose orange for the main core of the jacket and blue for the inside of the hood and black for the sleeves because I was continuing that New York Knicks theme. I kind of like the idea of my characters wearing a fully planned out outfit. It just kind of makes it more fun. It also makes the color selection work out nicely. I applied layer after layer of orange color, making sure to intensify my highlights closest to where the cell phone would be, up around his hood and his upper chest. A lot of the rest of the model is going to follow a very similar pattern. Let me see if I can best describe what that pattern is. This is the key to everything. We explored this concept in a previous video, and I called it highlight distribution. Very nerdy, I know. But the main idea is you have a certain color you want to represent. Normally, it's your midtone. But you also want to shade and highlight it with cool and fun colors. You need to make sure that enough of your midtone hangs around such that the thing you are painting looks like that color. Of these two things, which one looks more like white? Squint your eyes. Both of these little squares have the exact same layers of color, but they're just distributed differently, and that changes the overall impact of what they look like. This looks more like a light pink, this looks closer to white, or if not, a little bit brighter. The mind-blowing thing to me is that we're not just doing this while painting in comic book style. You are doing this every single time you paint a miniature. You just don't know it because it's hidden behind a bunch of blending. A great example of highlight distribution not working in my favor is when I tried to paint the cell phone. I began with a dark color and then tried to work up to a light color. And even though my layers were super small, there wasn't enough space at the end to paint a bright screen, have it look like anything realistic. So I backtracked. I painted the screen largely a bright color and then painted thin layers around the outside. If this video gets 5,000 likes, I'll paint a dick butt on that. If this video gets 5,000 likes, I will paint a dick butt on that phone. On God. I personally believe that this concept is one of the most important things for us to understand as mini painters. The finish of the material you're painting, whether it's oily skin or dry desert, is impacted by this idea. Different colors need to be treated differently in this regard, like the color red versus the color black. Am I losing you? I could be losing you. This isn't the right video to fully expand upon this idea, but in a future video, I really want to talk about why I think this is the most important thing for a hobbyist to grasp. But let's do some fun stuff. Pizza Boy has what looks like a cord that goes around his neck. It could be a necklace, it could be any number of things. I at first thought it was like a headphone cable, but I instead painted it to look like a cool gold chain. I think the key to really selling this idea was that I wasn't just painting stripes around it, but I was painting hoops. As I came around to the front of the necklace with my brush tip, my hoop dipped down and then went back up when I got to the back. That gave it a sense of gravity. I also made sure to add nice little dots of highlight on the side of the necklace that was closest to the cell phone, our main light source. It's also worth mentioning that I was mixing in this pastel green to every single midtone that I had to get a highlight in the hopes that it would kind of tint them all just a tiny bit green. The idea here being that cell phones have a green cast to them because they don't have the greatest light quality. All right, next up has to be the pizza. He's called Pizza Boy after all, and I feel like if I don't discuss the pizza, there'll be a small riot in the comment section below. Does anyone know how to paint a comic book style pizza on a bust? No, me either. Step 1, buy a pizza. Step 2, eat the pizza. Step 3, resist the urge to take reference photos because you're not doing that right now, Scott. Put the camera down. Step 4, just send it, bud. There's gotta be a zoomer term for that. I began with base coating with a fairly dark orange color. At this point in the painting process, I kind of thought that not everything needs to be black lined with literal black, and maybe I can just start with a very dark orange. I then built up highlights using ochre and then ochre mixed with that pastel green color I just mentioned. There's sauce and pepperonis, and I wanted them to look a little bit different, and so I painted them both initially with the same base red color, but then highlighted the pepperonis with a little bit brighter of a highlight to have them kind of pop out a bit more. They're kind of like greasy. I kind of struggled to find the perfect crust color. I don't have a paint called Pizza Crust Brown, unfortunately. I base coated it with something that was close to brown and then highlighted it with something that was kind of close to ochre, and I think that kind of sold the deal. Again here, I'm not black lining the pizza crust. I'm considering that dark first base coat to be my black lining in a way. I then painted the entire pizza box black in anticipation of painting the rest of the cardboard. And for the cardboard, I basically stippled on a dark brown and then a light brown, kind of getting a nice texture to the box, but also leaving a decent amount of that dark brown around the cheese, implying that some of that grease from the cheese is staining the box. And lastly, very early on in the video, I mentioned I had one more comic book inspired surprise, and it's time. With my vinyl cutter, I cut out a chat bubble out of styrene and also the word cheese with some of that Tamiya masking tape again. Eh? Get it? Cheese? Cheese? I then glued to the frame with a clear acrylic rod so that had kind of a 3D effect. And that's it. Pizza Boy done. For some reason, display models feel like they're easier to be more creative with. I had so much fun painting this model, and I feel like when you're having fun, it's a lot easier to be creative. I think a reason for that is because display painting lends itself to enjoying the painting process. So while you're painting, you're thinking of fun and creative ideas just to make the experience better for yourself. Like I said earlier in the video, I tried a lot of new things on this model, and a lot of them didn't pan out perfectly. The model doesn't exactly look like it's being lit with a small, harsh cell phone light. It looks like it's being lit by a 2-foot by 2-foot panel. Some of the comic book style is still a little bit too mini painterly. The moonlight effect is kind of meh. But you know, the model still looks pretty good and I'm really proud of it. And so what this taught me is that I don't need to necessarily go gung-ho on research and references and doing all this crazy stuff. I can just have fun painting a model and it's gonna turn out okay and I'm gonna be proud of it. And I think the same is true for you too. Maybe you can't get a result that's exactly like this, sure. But I think that our expectations are tempered by our current skill set. While display models that are painted way better than any model I've ever painted do exist, that doesn't mean that I'm not proud of the ones that I paint. I'm proud of my accomplishments as a painter and my improvements, not how they stack up against other people. I want to challenge you guys this month to paint a display model without looking up anything. Just kind of go for it, see what happens. Remember, it doesn't need to look beautiful. If you had fun during the process, or if you learned something, or even both, then it has value. The outcome is not the only important thing. That's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed Pizza Boy as much as I enjoyed painting it. I'll link a video at the end of this one that is similar to this one in case you wanna watch another video of mine. If you guys like the channel, there are many ways to support it, like buying my merch on my Miniac.co web store. But also another massive way is by being a patron. At the moment on the Discord, there is a quarterly challenge to paint a model in a comic book style. So if you're feeling inspired to do that, hop on the Discord, paint the mini comic book style, share it in the quarterly challenge chat, and get involved. My community of patrons are seriously amazing people that are always willing to help out with any question, and just in general are lovely people. I honestly can't say enough nice things about my patrons. How do I outro these videos? Oh yeah, that's right. Subscribe today! And most importantly, don't forget to paint my minis!